Hello and welcome to the Kongversation. I'm Hyle Russell.
I'm Chad McCanna.
And oh my God, we've got quite the show for you today. For a little perspective, this is like a political talk show getting a sitting president, like a music show landing a Beatle, like the Crystal Archive podcast getting that girl who painted herself blue and walked on the treadmill. This is a big deal, so no pressure. Please welcome Chris Sutherland.
Hello. I like being compared to a president. That's a good start.
It was Nixon. I'm sorry.
Is that the case that once you've been president, everybody has to call you Mr. President afterwards? Is that true?
That's true. So are you going around demanding everyone call you Mr. Sutherland?
I'm thinking now that should be the case. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't go with a title. Just go with your name. Keep it simple.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's not often we have hard-hitting newsmakers on the show, such as yourself. So before we get into, you know, your opinions on the State Department's reaction to the Benghazi scandal,
exactly,
I figured we'd go over some of your credits. Chris has been the programmer for Donkey Kong Country, Donkey Kong Country 2, Banjo-Kazooie, Grabbed by the Ghoulies. You did design on Banjo-Tooie, is that right?
I noticed that on something you sent me. I think I would kind of say that in terms of design, I'm kind of just. I'm a programmer, but I help with the design in the sense of I kind of work with designers. So I don't know. I'd be interested to know where the design credit came from.
That was actually culled from Moby Games, and they generally have a pretty exhaustive credits resource for video games. One of the only ones online, but I guess they're off there.
Well, you know, it could be that their memory is better than mine. So, you know.
Yeah, it's also the fact that you guys at Rare were pretty damn secretive in the late 90s, so trying to figure out exactly what you were doing is a pretty tall task.
Yeah, I was partially convinced watching the credits of those old games. You know, you'd see, you know, Gmails, C. Sutherland. Like, I didn't think you people those were real names. There was part of that was from the fake credits in Donkey Kong Country that. You know, it was kind of a once bitten, twice shy thing, but yeah, it was this enigmatic air that I don't know if that was intentionally cultivated at Rare or that was sort of a byproduct that then you realized, oh, there's something to this.
I think I remember at the time on various games we had gone through cycles of going, should we put any credits in or should we not put credits in? And I think some Rare games may have had actually been released without any credits.
Seriously?
Or certainly that it was considered. But I think in the end it was like, oh, what's the order of the credits? Because that's another thing, especially, you know, as teams grow in sizes, like who goes first and things. So I think in the end, a lot of people nowadays tend to do alphabetical. So that's kind of quite it's democratic.
Yeah, it's diplomatic way to do it.
And of course, obviously, as you get approach to the end of where you're starting to prepare the credits, everybody starts to change their name to be Aardvark. Try and get to the start of the credits.
Yeah, you've just got a team full of bizarre ant-eating creatures.
That's right. Yeah, Aaron. Everybody's. I mean, my name's now Aaron.
Yeah,
for this
with 3 A's.
Yeah.
So you've also done quite a bit of voice work. I don't know if that was just a byproduct of you being around or if that's something you actively pursued, but you've been the voice of Banjo-Kazooie, Daniel Carrington, the Killer Instinct announcer, and one half of the DK Rappers.
That's right, yeah. And it was more by accident rather than design. And it was really because I think in that kind of era, nobody would consider paying for somebody to actually do any voice acting. It was kind of almost, you know, to even suggest that would be kind of ludicrous. You know, if somebody said, we should get someone to pay someone to do this. Well, what? Pay someone to make a voice? Particularly for vocal sounds as well. But, you know, I think even when you start, I mean, I suppose around when GoldenEye and Perfect Dark were coming out, then maybe that was when you started to see a lot of more games start to bring in voice actors. But we were kind of, I think we're still in that mold of saying, you know, we'll get... we'll just use people within the team. And so I think, I'm trying to think when the first one I did was perhaps when we did Battletoads Coin Op. And we had to have we just had, when you press start, you had to have an announcement of the characters, which was Zitz, Rash, and Pimple. So I had to do Zitz, Rash, Pimple, that kind of thing.
I really appreciate how well you enunciate when you do Pimpo. That's nice.
So it was that kind of thing that we have to do, and then then it kind of grew from there. And it was more because once you've done it once, Because the first time you do it, you feel a bit silly standing in front of a microphone making stupid noises, and then once you've done it once, people just go, "Oh, well, he can do that because I don't want to do that."
He has no sense of shame or personal
exactly,
pride.
Yeah, so that's right. So then, and some of them, even in later years, I was still doing placeholder ones. So even when we get proper people in who can actually know how to speak properly, we'd have people come in. So, for example, when we did the Kinect Sports, well, this probably isn't going to mean much to people in the US or Canada, but when we did the Kinect Sports, we had Peter Dixon, who's an announcer, television announcer, who is on the X Factor in the UK, and he does the lead-in credits there. So we were looking for a kind of, when we did the party mode in that, we needed an announcer, and I did a kind of a poor impression of him, and then that kind of made us decide, perhaps we should get him to do it. So we actually ended up with him actually doing it. And I knew it was a bad impression because we had a playtesting session where we had brought public in to play the game, and we had only got my placeholder voice in there at the time. And I remember a group of women playing the game and saying, "Yeah, I quite like the game, but that guy, he's just doing a really bad impression of Peter Dixon." And so I kind of thought, at that point, I knew, well, that's obviously my level.
Was this kind of thing where you were like behind a one-way mirror and you can see them and you're getting disappointed in real time, or?
I was actually in the room. There was no mirror. I was just watching, and I was going as they're playing, and I thought, oh right, okay. So I kind of snuck back into the background and didn't really say anything.
That wasn't me.
Yeah, that voice is terrible. I mean, who was that guy? We'll fire him immediately.
Did he ever hear the impression of you that was the placeholder?
I don't think he ever did. I don't know if he actually ever knew that was the story behind it. I don't know if he ever knew that that's how it came about.
Well, you eventually switched over to producerial duties on the likes of Viva Pinata, the Avatars program for the Xbox, and then Kinect Sports itself. Did the role differ all that much, or were you also still doing programming?
It switched about just at the end of Grab by the Ghoulies, actually, and it was more because I guess we were involved with Microsoft then, and then there was, when you're involved with a large corporation, you're using the tools that they have, such as marketing and so on. So you're, I suppose with Nintendo, it was more of a case of, it was very kind of quite old school, and I don't imagine it works like this anymore, even with Nintendo, which is you would build the game and then you kind of, it's like you throw it over a wall and then they kind of go, oh, well, we got this game, right, let's go and market it now.
It's very waterfall style.
It is very, it's like, they were probably expecting something to be thrown over the wall, but exactly what it was, they didn't know until it necessarily arrived.
So that's how you got away with it.
Yeah, exactly. So, but then it makes more sense, obviously, if you've got some kind of coordination going on with different departments. And so, working with Microsoft, there was a kind of a need for someone to kind of do that communication role. And then towards the end of Grab Out the Ghoulies, I was kind of doing less and less programming and more communication, just because there was nobody else around to do that. And so it just seemed like a logical decision to kind of take over on that aspect. And then the other thing was team sizes were increasing as well, just because of the nature of the gaming industry and the kind of games we were producing. So it meant that you kind of needed, for every N number of people, you need somebody to help coordinate those number of people, because otherwise it just becomes nobody quite knows what's going on. Or,
you have to kind of be a switchboard operator to an extent.
Yeah, that's basically it. Yeah, so and it was different in the sense that going from programming, where you're just basically sitting and focusing on one thing at a time, and for days or hours or days on end, to going to something where you're basically doing lots of little jobs and little tasks, and kind of switching between them at a higher rate of knots. So it's quite different in that respect.
Yeah. Well, and now having left Rare, you're the project director and software engineer for Project Yooka-Laylee at Playtonic. And aside from keeping the googly eye manufacturing industry afloat, what can you give us some insight into how Playtonic came about and sort of what your role is there?
Yeah. So it came about. I guess those games we worked on in the 1990s. We always thought it'd be great to kind of take those games up to bring them back up to date. And the opportunity never really arose until I think last year it was. And it was something we've been talking about before between a number of us, but it was only last year that it kind of all the stars aligned in a sense that there was people who had left Rare previously, and then myself and Gavin and a number of others had left last year. So it felt like everything came together, and then it was, after a number of discussions and kind of seeing what fitted, then we kind of formed the company then to really say, well, this is what we want to do, is want to bring the magic back from that era back to today, really.
Yes, that's fantastic. It's definitely been much needed, and I think we're starting to see a real renaissance. And this is just the kind of the latest tip of the spear of that, especially in the 3D collectathon genre. So it's really...
assuming Project Yooka-Laylee is a 3D collectathon.
Oh, of course, we don't know anything about it.
Yeah, I think it's fair to assume that that's the case. Yeah, I mean,
and mind you, we're not using collectathon as a pejorative. We absolutely love that aspect of those games.
Right.
That's right, and certainly there'll be things to collect, and the things to collect will be meaningful. They won't be. So I mean, that's interesting as well. Just a slight tangent is that since we announced, I mean, we've been taken aback by the amount of press and kind of fan mail that we've got, and so we've been responding to a lot of that. But people are pretty, clear on what they know will work and what won't work. So they've said to us, do put this in, don't put that in. I really love these things from those games, and so that's really helped clarify things for us. So that's, I think, a good thing.
It seems like, on one hand, that I can see how that would be helpful, but is there also a consideration that, you do want to kind of chart your own course and not, it's the sort of a horse designed by committee is a camel, and no one wants to ride a camel in a show.
Right. It seems to me it's almost like telling Michelangelo how to sculpt.
Are you trying to find that balance?
I definitely so. I think it's good to, because effectively one of the reasons we're making this is for ourselves, but it's something that we want people to play. So we're kind of using it not as a kind of something that says, they want everything needs to be red because red's the in color this month.
It's teal and orange. It's always teal and orange.
Yeah, teal and orange. Yeah. So we want to make sure that we're not going to completely go off track and produce something that we think, this is the most amazing thing, you'll never believe it. We've got vehicles or something, and people go, vehicles? What's vehicles? But I'm not expecting vehicles. But anything like that.
I can't imagine what you're referencing.
Yeah, but it could be vehicles. It could be. I think maybe that was the case with something like Grab of the Ghoulies, which I kind of thought was more of a puzzle game. It's strange now, actually, when I look at things online about that game. At the time, it was the reaction was less than positive, and then now I seem to look around, and then there's a lot more people saying, "Oh yeah, well actually, it wasn't. Actually, this is quite good. This game, actually, it was underrated." And so it's interesting when you look back at that. But I think that had a similar reaction where it came out, and people thought, "Oh, well, I was expecting this," and they were kind of a bit disappointed. So even if we decide we're going to do whatever it is we're going to do, and then we'll at least be aware that people will be expecting something that we're not going to be delivering. But to be honest, what we will be delivering is what people will be expecting. So I think that'll be fine.
That was, you can tell how much time you've spent at Rare because you said so much but said nothing. That was amazing.
Right. Yes, that's right. I basically just said, whatever you can imagine is what we're going to give you.
And you know what? I want to play it now.
Like you didn't want to play it before, Chad? Really?
No, of course. If it was on a system I don't own, I would buy that system to play it. I'm already invested in this thing, but just the way you so deftly said nothing, it was incredible. It was like a Jedi master.
It's a skill I learned as a producer.
Well, so we did open up the floor for questions to listeners of the show and readers on DK Vine. That might have been folly because we were inundated, but there was one question I wanted to touch on while we were still talking about your job regarding programming. Shall we take that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
Hey, Chris. Great to hear from you. I think I speak for everyone in the whole world when I say we're really genuinely appreciative of your time. So hopefully my question isn't too vague. Right, so as a programmer type fella, you've perhaps not been as involved with the more sort of superficial elements of these games that a lot of us obsess over. So, graphics, visuals, characters, worlds, music, whatever else, I don't know. But I'm wondering if you've had any influence on these more superficial things. Presumably, as a programmer, you've had to have some say in design choices and so on, simply because you have to accommodate what's possible. Basically, I'm interested to hear you speak a little bit about the interaction, such as it was, between you guys on the technical side of things and everyone on the sort of more quote-unquote artistic sides of the whole game-making biz. So that's my question. Hopefully it wasn't too massively long-winded. Thanks for doing this, man. Cheers. Take it easy.
Yes, that's a good question. I'd say that there is definitely an influence, and that influence it's basically a collaboration with those other people in those other areas. So someone may come along and say, they might say, here's a run animation, and we might put that run animation in, and then we go, well, that doesn't quite feel right. Let's maybe the speed's not right, and we might tweak it, and we might say, well, actually, that run's not going to work at all. We need to completely change it. A run's probably not the best example, but like a jump animation is a classic one where you put that in, it's not quite right, so you kind of work on deciding what might be better. You might suggest the way that the animation's taking place isn't quite right, and there might be better ways to do that, and then you work with the artist.
Is it kind of an iterative feedback?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's the key. When you want to create anything that's good, you need to be able to iterate and have time to iterate. And the key thing is the speed of which you can make that iteration. The faster you can have that loop work, the better. So, for example, if I had to write a document that said, here is how the character will jump, and then I had to pass it to someone else, and then I had to wait a week for them to draw the animation, and then they wrote a document, and then they eventually did the animation, and it came back, and then I said, and I wrote another document to say how they should have done it. That wouldn't be very efficient. So what you kind of need is someone, you almost to be sitting right next to the person and working with them and saying, let's try that. No, that doesn't work. Let's try something else. As an extreme example, I was just thinking today, back on Banjo-Kazooie, when the Mumbo transformation, where there's like a swirly particle effect, I remember, and this was back in the day on the in Silicon Graphics indie machines, where those weren't actually that fast. So the iteration on that was fairly slow in terms of, because you basically had to make a change, compile, and then try it out, and then change, compile again.
So even the in-game was on a Silicon Graphics workstation. It wasn't just the produced renders that we would see.
That's right, yeah. So those were, so I suppose that was a bit, before that we'd worked on PC, but you actually built the game, that all the software was compiled on there.
Wow.
And, I remember on that spending an entire day just changing numbers to make the effect slightly better. And I must have compiled the game about somewhere between 50 and 100 times.
Just to get like that particle effect and the squash.
And that's all I did, because I looked, that's all I'd done all day, was I just typed compile, return, no, edit that number, no, change it, maybe it should work more like this, maybe swirl more like that. And so that's kind of iteration to the extreme. But nowadays, with the tool sets you have nowadays in things like Unity, then it doesn't need to be solely an engineering job. Somebody else can come in and kind of create those particles outside in, so it could be an artist or a designer or anybody really. So there's actually more scope for collaboration now than there was in the past, because in the past everything tended to route through the software engineer, which was great in some respects, but in other respects it meant that you'd have, like, for example, if Grant Kirkhope wanted a sound effect in the game, he'd come and sit on your desk basically and say, I need the sound effect to go in the game, and he wouldn't leave until it was in. So
that's how things got done. You basically chained yourself to someone's desk.
Basically, yeah. So nowadays he could put that kind of thing in himself, and that would be, that makes things a lot simpler, because you don't have that that kind of having to wait for everyone to do everything.
Yeah, everyone doesn't become a bottleneck in the process.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, well, we are going to look into the past a bit, if that's okay, go through the fog of time and talk about the early days up through the present. And DK Vine forum member Milo wanted to know, what was your role on the various versions of Battletoads?
So on Battletoads, I kind of consider the NES one is probably the definitive one. I think that's what people would say. With the ridiculously hard speeder bike level.
I think you could just stop at ridiculously hard. That whole damn game.
Yeah. So on that, my role was nothing other than I suppose I watched Mark Betteridge create that game. So I didn't contribute anything to that one. But then on the arcade machine, we called it Coin Op. That one was basically, I did everything on that one because Chris Stamper built the hardware for that, and we just started from scratch and just built everything, including everything that had to write the graphics, the sprites to the screen, and the audio. I remember writing the audio system for Dave Wise. There was a chip that we had to work with to write the audio subsystem for that. So everything was built from the ground up. So in some ways, you think of that now, and it's almost quite scary. You think I've just got to start with nothing, and then you build everything out.
Was that a more rewarding process doing the coin op than working on pre-established hardware like on the NES?
It's interesting, I suppose. So I didn't work on the NES as such. The first game I worked on was Spider-Man on the Game Boy, and in fact,
that classic.
Yeah, I digress slightly, but when I started my first day, they showed me. They said, "Oh, here's this. This is what you're going to be working on. It's this new machine," and it was a Game Boy, and I'd never seen one before. So I thought, "Oh, that's interesting." And of course, there was no internet then, so I couldn't post it on Kotaku or anything. So they were safe, but neither was I aware of what it was. So I'd spent a day looking at this manual, which was only a few pages. And I think the manual on the Game Boy was considered to be quite comprehensive by the people when I joined. They said, oh, there's quite a lot of detail in that one. And there was only a handful of pages compared to the NES one, which I think was literally like a sheet of toilet paper or something.
They also distributed it in rolls.
Yes, that's right, yeah. So it was interesting. Then on the second day, I think Carol Stamper came around with a folder and said, here's the first game you'll be working on. It's Spider-Man. And basically that was it. It was just me and graphic artist Trevor. We just had to work out what the game was. And so that was on your second day at work to be told, right, you're working on this, off you go. And then I'd just come out of university, so I kind of knew a bit about programming, but I hadn't really written games to any vast degree. So there was a lot of trust placed in people in those days. So
yeah,
but that's how that started. There, I can't remember how I got onto.
Oh, it doesn't matter. This show is all about tangents, and we very rarely find our way back.
I think it was related to the fact of how we. The difference between building things from the ground up.
Yeah, so on your coin op.
It was very much the case. I think the point I was probably trying to make was that when working on the Game Boy, you were still building things more or less from the ground up, because there was a very thin layer between you and the machine. Whereas nowadays, it's interesting nowadays, so it's changed kind of the other way around, because when you're developing software nowadays, rather than spending a lot of your time thinking, how will I do this, you're actually thinking, this has already been done. So a lot of your time spent on Google typing, how do you do the such and such? And you go, oh, right, somebody's already done that. That's good. And then you look at it and you go, well, I can use that, or I see what they're trying to do there. Particularly on something like Unity or Unreal, there's a whole swathe of people out there who've almost certainly encountered the same problems that you have already.
Yeah. Stack Overflow is an amazing website.
Absolutely, yes. It is incredible. It's just, you think nobody will encounter this problem, and you think it's just me, and then you type it in, and then, there's 100 people already got that.
Yeah.
So, obviously, Chad and I came to the table because of your work on Donkey Kong Country. I mean, we are grown men who host a show called The Kongversation, and we're not on any police watch list either. So it's
that we know of.
We know of.
They probably wouldn't tell us.
So obviously we're gonna have to talk about Donkey Kong Country a little bit. And forum member Crispy wanted to know: were you aware, like after Donkey Kong Country was released, were you aware of how much of a big deal it was? How like there was a mania around that game, especially in the West, and did that have any level of impact as you started work on the sequel?
I think we were probably not fully aware when we were developing it, but then there was a point where I think it was when we were coming across to the Consumer Electronics Show, as it was, the year of the release of the first game, that we were sitting on the plane, and we'd just been focusing on developing for the past 9 months, and so we'd sitting there with these magazines, computer magazines on the plane, and I was reading about all these games that were coming up at the CES, and it was like, oh, this game is going to blow people away, and obviously nobody knew about our game, so that was interesting, because we were reading it and looking at it and going, well, the graphics on these things look good, but the stuff that we're producing, and it wasn't kind of a big-headed thing, it was just kind of almost a statement of fact that because we were doing pre-rendered graphics, the level of quality was almost guaranteed to be higher. So it was like, this is going to quite surprise a few people. So
yeah, and I think everything was kind of kept under wraps until that show.
Yeah, it was, and it was kept very secretive, actually. And I suppose in those days there was no internet, so there was no kind of things like embargoes or anything. So nobody genuinely didn't. It wasn't like today when you'll be sitting in the audience and they'll go, and now we're going to unveil, ta-da! And actually, probably most of the journalists in the audience will know, yeah, well, I knew they were going to reveal that because they told me 2 months ago and I had to sign something. But, it was different then. So, and I think there's also the case that when they did the unveil was actually at their Nintendo press conference, that they'd been talking about Project Reality and the Nintendo 64, and people, when they showed the video of Donkey Kong Country, that people actually believed that it was on the next generation of hardware. So when they said, actually, this is coming out on Super Nintendo, people couldn't quite believe it. So that was exciting as well. But after that, I think, again, because there wasn't really an internet as such, we could see that in magazines, in gaming magazines, we were mentioned a lot, but it wasn't something that you could notice quite as much as you can today. I mean, today it's easy to find out if people are getting excited because you can hop on Twitter and see what's trending. But and then it was a bit harder.
Were you more isolated as well? I mean, working on a basically a converted farmhouse in Twycross as opposed to a big city where, was that... Did that introduce any isolation that kept you in a bubble?
I think so. I think probably because we were just so focused on creating the games. And so in terms of the impact it had on DKC2, I mean, some parts of DKC1 which didn't make it would probably have been the things that got fed into DKC2. So some parts were decided. I don't know that it had a great... I suppose it obviously had some effect, because obviously if the reception to DKC1 was terrible, then we wouldn't have been doing DKC2.
Right.
But we pretty much knew that we had to get on with DKC2 pretty darn quick. So it was, I suppose it was only in that sense that it had an effect.
Well, we do have a call that's alarmingly relevant to the subject at hand. Shall we take it?
Sure. Yep.
Hello, this is Kasper Kuzmitsky. I'm just calling in to give a question to Mr. Sutherland. We on DK Vine highly cherish Donkey Kong Country 2, and many call it the greatest video game of all time. But when I look on the internet, I have a hard time finding out about the development of the game. You can find a lot on the first Donkey Kong Country, but not on the second. And this hurts me, because I would love to know just a little bit about what happened in the brains of these brilliant British men. So my question is, or it's rather a request, is can you tell us just a little bit on how it was working on that game? And did you guys know that you were creating a masterpiece of a video game? Thank you.
So that's a great question. I wish I had a great answer, because maybe it's the same and that there isn't anything on the internet. Maybe there's something in this, because my memory doesn't make me recall much about what happened during DKC2. It was all blur. So I thought maybe it's been erased in a kind of Men in Black style thing. Maybe something significant did happen there, and it's been wiped from the traces of the internet and my brain.
Well, it's amazing. You were talking about the whole process, this feedback loop of going to someone's desk, or perhaps, I mean, maybe it was worse on the N64 where you had to hit compile and wait, but it's shocking that game was developed in the space of a year.
Yes, it was. There was, I think that was it, and I think we then knew, we've got to repeat this process again. So, the pressure was on in the sense that we knew we had to take advantage of the popularity of the game as it was for the first one. So we had to get something out, in that next year. And I think we probably had slightly less time, because when we started Donkey Kong Country, it was been in the August of the year before. So by the time we'd finished, it would probably have been about September or October. So we probably have slightly less time, but then you kind of trade that off with the fact that we knew some of we could kind of steal stuff, and it's like, that didn't fit in the first one, we'll take that across to the second one. And some things were in place. We didn't have to build all the character movement and everything from scratch.
Well, we did have a question tangential to this by Josh from the Geek Critique, asking about the fact that Diddy was made the star of the game, which seems like a risky move. And I know you said you could kind of reuse some of the assets, but was putting Donkey Kong himself out of the limelight seen as a risk at all?
I don't know if it was necessarily seen as a risk. It was probably seen as just trying something a little bit different. I mean, essentially, you're going to still get the same feel to the game. You're going to get the same level of visual quality, and it was give it a bit of a twist. I guess that's that. I can't recall the exact reasoning or thought process behind it, but then often these things back in those days, there wasn't. It's not like there was a committee to decide, should we do this or should we do that? And it's kind of the way we're developing things right now here at Playtonic. Is somebody will suggest something, and then we'll say, well, that seems like a good idea, let's do that. And we, if you're working with a team of, say, 100 people, you can't really do that kind of thing.
And you've got a marketing guy in the room who says the Donkey Kong IP is stronger. We can't make this guy. Yeah, it's
exactly. Yeah, it becomes more difficult because you've got so many different groups, like you said, marketing and so on, involved, that you need to make sure that everybody's aligned. So you've got to make sure that everybody knows that this is the right decision to make. And so you kind of got there'd be a process that you'd have to basically convince those people that was the right thing, or at least inform them and then confirm that there wasn't an issue with that, and then before you proceeded. Or you could just change your mind, try and make that change anyway, but obviously with the risk that's further down the line, somebody goes, wait a minute, we've just spent X million dollars building this marketing release that just describes this feature that you've just cut. So you don't want that to happen. But so the larger the teams are, the more complicated things become. But then at the same time, I suppose the more you can benefit from the size, the scale of the marketing itself.
Are you enjoying a lot of that agility working on the new team at Playtonic? It seems like you are.
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite refreshing. It's kind of like a throwback to that era where we're just kind of going, well, we'll try this now. And at first we thought, because we're so used to taking a bit more, not taking longer, but taking longer for the right reasons, in the sense that you've got to say, well, I need to make sure that all these other people are aware of this big decision we're making. But now, because all the people that need to be aware of it are in the same room, you can just say, well, I think we'll do this now. And then I think the character will jump 3 times as high as he did yesterday. And everybody goes, yeah, that sounds right. Well, let's do that. Okay, that's done. Decided.
It seems so much more efficient. Like, I feel like the industry has just gotten too big for its own good at this point, where you can't make simple decisions anymore without multi-million-dollar contracts behind it.
I think it's a challenge, definitely, because it works for if you're doing an iteration. Going back to iteration again, if you're doing an iteration on a release, so if you're doing My Amazing Shooting Game number 5, then you've got My Amazing Shooting Game number 4 is out there. So you go, well, okay, we know everybody has an understanding of what number 4 was like. Here's the delta between 4 and 5, and here's the small bit of documentation that you need, and everybody kind of has that as a reference. When you're going, right, well, let's build a My Amazing Game that you've never heard of, number 1, then you've got to go, well, what is that exactly? And you suddenly got to start from scratch and explain all the ideas and what you're trying to get to and what the ethos is. And if you've got a large number of people to do that, then that becomes very challenging, I think.
Right.
It's probably a fair word to say.
Well, after DKC2, you moved on to Dream. And how did Dream evolve into eventually Banjo-Kazooie? I mean, was it a gradual process, or was it just replacing it bit by bit until you realized you had a completely different game on your hands?
There was a one point where we did switch round to go into what became Banjo. We'd spent a fair while, I think about a year or so, on Dream, so the origins of Dream were actually related to Donkey Kong Country, in that when we were doing Donkey Kong Country, obviously we were producing these pre-rendered visuals, which meant that the visual quality was significantly higher than people were used to.
Yeah.
And then when we first started to get hold of the Nintendo 64 hardware, I think in our heads we thought, maybe we'll be able to produce this in real time, although we kind of probably really knew that wasn't going to be possible. So when we realized that the number of polygons you could actually render in real time was quite a lot less than we'd been using in the models in Donkey Kong Country, it meant that you would get the visual quality would actually be less for any kind of, for a certain area of the screen. You'd see less detail.
I mean, it would be vector scalable, but
absolutely,
but that's the only major advantage, it would seem.
So I think as a result of that, we ended up going on a route which basically said, let's try and emulate that visual quality by having effectively billboards, a bit like I suppose some of the old racing games like Sega, not Sega Rally, but some of the older racing games where you just have flat sprites that are just enlarged and shrunk as you go in and out of the distance. And so it was based around like that, and the 3D world was effectively lots of flat sprites that looked really nice. And that actually visually, on a static screenshot, looked really good. The problem was that when you rotated the camera, then they started to flip around and kind of look a bit flickery. It didn't really look quite right. And so we tried a few things, such as keeping the camera steady, and then also, I think keeping the camera steady was one of them, and then trying to do different ways to sort those tiles to try and make it so that they didn't glitch as much. But it never really quite got there. And so we were trying that for quite a while, and then development kind of got to a point where I think we came back after a Christmas break, and then I think it was Tim Stamper and Greg had kind of got together and decided we needed to kind of make a bit of a change. And then at the same time as that was happening, there was the Conquer in its original form.
12 Tales?
12 Tales,
yeah.
12 Tales, yeah. So they'd actually gone the other route, because I suppose they hadn't had the history that we had of producing these flat rendered visuals, maybe, and they said, let's just do it as anybody sensibly would, I guess, and say, let's just do it with polygons. And they'd actually done something that was looking really nice, and so we went to see what they'd been creating. And when we saw that, we thought, hang on a minute, this is actually a route that we can go down. So we kind of changed direction 360, and then went for a kind of more open environment. And then it was around that time that we then put in the bear, and the bear then had a jump, and then he needed to have a double jump, and then the suggestion was, maybe he's got wings that come out of his back, but then he needed, what would they come out of? Or they come out of a backpack. All right, let's put a backpack on. But why would they have a backpack with wings in it? Or maybe there's a bird inside. So that's the kind of evolution and iteration of how that idea, in about 10 seconds, but actually probably took maybe a few weeks, that evolved from putting a bear in rather than a boy that was existed in Dream, to then having a Banjo and Kazooie duo.
Yeah. Was Dream always kind of intended to be a 3D platformer just on hardware that didn't really work out in the end?
There was a couple of sections that we had running. There was one where you played a boy, and he found you saw that there was a dog he had to rescue. I remember because I had to do the voice, so I had to go.
Of course,
a dog. I can hear a dog down there. I better go and see if he's all right. So he said that, and then he got the dog, and then there were some trolls that came in, and they were chased by these trolls. And then he fell down a hole, and then there's a different section which is like a vertical. It's like top. You saw there's a game I can't remember the name of that's been out recently. That's just like this. You're looking down to the ground from a great height, and you're falling down, and you kind of got to dodge obstacles as you drop down this big hole.
There's one on the 3DS called Kersploosh, which is like you're describing, but I don't know if that's the one.
It might be that one, yeah. So that was the second section, and then I think there was other sections beyond that where they were kind of more adventure-y than maybe platformy. So they were more kind of wander around and talk to people than they were kind of jumpy, fast movement. I think because even with the techniques that we were using with these flat planes, it was still the frame rate was still not fast enough to really have something that was really speedy and jumping around at high speeds.
Yeah. Well, on the flip side of content that didn't ultimately make it in, we did have a question that was called in that I think is pretty interesting. Shall we take a look?
Hello, Mr. Sutherland. My sincerest thanks for indulging DK Vine and all the fans. All my creative endeavors are owed in large part to the staff of Rare and Beyond, who introduced me to games that seemed just as fun to make as they were to play. Eagerly await anything you and the talented bunch at Playtonic have up your sleeves. I'll try to resist the overwhelming urge to ask you to say stupid things in the voices of Banjo and Daniel Carrington, so these are the questions I could think of that might actually have some substance. As fans, I think we have a tendency to get fixated on and romanticize little bits and pieces that didn't quite make it into our favorite games. That said, are there any elements in the Banjo-Kazooie or Donkey Kong Country titles, big or small, which were memorable for you because they did carry through to the final game, that you're especially proud of, be it a feature that was nearly cut or something that just happened to pose an interesting technical hurdle for the team to overcome? Again, the utmost thanks for your time, sir.
Interesting. I think in terms of technical hurdles, one of the more challenging ones I think was in Banjo-Kazooie, in Banjo-Tooie rather. I'm getting my DKC2 mixed up with my Banjo-Tooie. In Banjo-Tooie, we had a ledge grab, which I guess is just standard practice nowadays. Everybody has that. But back then, it was kind of a new thing. So in terms of implementing it, I mean, this is probably, I don't know if this is going to too much technical detail, but in terms of implementing it, the sensible way perhaps would just be to go, I'll tell you what, every ledge that you can grab on, we'll just mark it in some way to say that's the ledge that you can grab onto, and then the software will be able to test that ledge. But for some reason, I think I decided that we'd do it the harder way around, which didn't seem like the hard way at first. It was like, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll just look at where his hands will be, and we'll kind of grab all the polygons around there, and then we'll do some calculations to basically work out whether those are mathematically suitable to be a ledge or not. So it meant the game was having to do, it was having to grab these areas and kind of go, is this a ledge or not? And so that meant that
is it like looking at the angle of the corner?
Absolutely, yeah. So it had to look at the angle that the triangle was at, and then whether there was other connected triangles, and then whether if it was vertical or facing slightly in, then it was like, that's probably okay to use that one. And then it also had to make sure that you could move along those polygons as well, because you had to be able to kind of edge your way along the ledges. But I remember that just it was one of the things that I thought, it won't take that long, but it took a bit longer than I expected. And it was a kind of ongoing process throughout development where you'd be playing the game and then suddenly you'd be hanging on the ledge of some that didn't exist. It would be just, you'd be in a polygon somewhere in the middle. I think we even shipped with, I'm sure there's a bug in Hailfire Peaks where there's a lava flow, and I'm sure it was in a bug log, and I never tracked it down. It was one of those things I had a look at, and then I thought, I've run out of time to have a look at this now. I need to move on to something else. And in the middle of the lava flow, you can jump and you can land and kind of grab into the middle of the air. So that still exists. I never figured out why that was, but that's something that I'm kind of quite glad it made in. But then it was one of those things I thought maybe there would have been a better way to do it if we did that again.
Do you kind of prefer those sort of solutions where you can let the game sort of dynamically decide what's going to happen as opposed to pre-scripting everything?
Yes, we kind of there's a mixture of both, I suppose. Sometimes it works better if you can do it so that it's if the game's calculating things and it's saying this is what it needs to do based on the information that's in the game world, because you get things just happen and that will cause something else to happen, so you get a kind of a succession, a chain reaction of other things that can happen, that can evolve. Whereas if you kind of hard code it to say this is exactly so, for example, if you run along and then you press the crouch button and then the character slides to a halt. Now you could say you could work it based on deceleration, or you could do something really cheap and say, well, actually he's always going to travel a certain distance. He's always going to travel 10 feet or 5 feet, and then he'll come to a stop. And that works fine when you hard code it, but then what happens is further down the line you'll hit a problem where you'll go, oh right, he's running up a slope now press crouch, but he goes 5 feet up the slope, but that's not right, because he should go less far up the slope. But then combine that with maybe there's another move where when you crouched and you slid, and at the end of the slide you pressed a button and then something you transform to a different move because you're at the end of the slide, and then suddenly if you do it the physics way where he slows down slower on the slope, then you can't get that move out in time. Mm-hmm. So it's actually better to do it the hard-coded way. So there's a kind of trade-off between those, and I don't know if that gives you a sense of what that trade-off is, but sometimes you're going one route and you're going, oh, that's not working, try to switch to the other way. And it kind of depends where you end up.
It's very
detailed.
Well, no,
detailed
it sounds like it's a very case by case basis, really. That you're constantly figuring out what works best for that exact scenario.
Yeah, so you're always thinking, maybe I should have done it like that. But sometimes you come back and you change that. But you kind of have to make a decision based on experience and where you are, and kind of just say, "Oh, I'll go with that." Yeah,
I mean that's one thing I'm sure your tenure has greatly aided in, especially in the genre that you're now working on with Project Yooka-Laylee, is that you probably at this point
alleged genre.
That's right. You probably know a lot of those pitfalls.
I think that's it. I think it's we're not. I think I said we're not creating any massive design up front that says this is exactly what we're going to do, and I think we can get away with that to a degree because we've been experienced enough that we know what things are going to work. I mean, there's a danger, obviously, if you didn't quite know what you're doing, you might paint yourself into a corner, and then you go, "This isn't you." You build a whole lot of stuff, and then you go, "Oh, it doesn't work anymore because I've made certain decisions that mean that I'm going to have to spend months to kind of unravel the mess that I've made for myself." But I'd hope that we've had enough experience that we can kind of make those kind of off-the-cuff decisions on a day-to-day basis. That means that we can just kind of invent stuff as we go, in a sense.
Yeah, it's funny. Hyle and I are working as writers on another 3D platformer project, Lobo Destroyo. That we're not involved in the actual game development. We're just writing on the project. But talking to their project lead, a lot of those struggles, I think, is due to the fact that most of them are fairly new to developing in this genre, if not games as a whole. So I'm sure these indie developers would really appreciate having access to that shorthand that you do. So you're definitely ahead of the curve there. That's got to be a boon.
Yeah, I think. I guess it is difficult if you're starting out because you don't know, is this the right way to go or not? And then sometimes we're not quite sure either. But you've almost got to sometimes try it, or try and get to you put something in that works as much as it can, as soon as it can. So you might say, well, to do the whole feature might take like 3 weeks, but you try and get something in the first few days that says, try and get the essence of the feature in. There's a great talk by, someone at Vlambeer who talks about the art of screen shake, and they step you through, it's on YouTube, and they step you through a whole set of different versions of a game, from the the simplest version is he's basically walking around with a very slow shooting gun to one that's like shooting at vast numbers of these other characters, enemy characters that are coming towards him. And he takes you through each stage and he shows you how the feel of a game can be improved just by single tiny little incremental steps. And so you try and get to the first step as soon as possible, because then you can build on that over time.
Yeah, it sounds like almost an agile development or Scrum way of practicing it. That's
don't get Chad started on Scrum.
I'm a professional Scrum I do educational software for a living, so I know all the tropes and buzzwords and all that stuff.
Right, sure.
Well, we've got an email question here that we received, and in no way related to what we just talked about. It says, Chris, are you really from Scotland? You don't talk Scottish. You sound more like you're from the Midlands. I've heard you don't even like haggis, but prefer a simple ham and cheese baguette. Is this true? And that is from, the whole team at Playtonic, actually.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
So they can't hear what you're saying, because I'm going to repeat that now. So they can hear. So the team at Playtonic seems to have asked me a question about am I really Scottish? That's what it says.
They're lying.
Gavin says they're lying.
We would never.
So there is a kind of
that
joke
was a
going
serious
around
question. Yeah, please answer.
Yeah,
We really want to know.
There is a joke going around that because my knowledge of Scotland is kind of limited. I think I might have just spent all my time playing games. I never actually came out to look outside in my youth, and then moved down to England. And then people said, "You don't have a Scottish accent," and I said, "Well, it's probably because I just spent all my time playing games or watching American television. That's probably the reason."
You do have a great American accent, by the way, and all of your voiceover work for Rare. I mean, I had no idea Rare was actually located in the UK until probably 1995. So, well done on that.
There were the certain words that I'm told that I say that place me back in Scotland. And that, to me, it's one of those things when you say those words, you think that sounds just completely normal to me. So if I say banana, apparently that sounds strange. Or if I say cornflakes, apparently that's odd. But to me, it sounds perfectly normal.
Yeah, you're hitting the R on corn pretty hard.
I think that's what it is. Yeah, It must. Yeah, see, to me it sounds just normal, but to you're going, that sounds really weird.
I make a habit of referring to dialects as weird. I never try and understand another culture. They're just strange and weird to me.
Maybe that helped with Daniel Carrington's voice, because he was obviously modelled on Sean Connery. So that's where he came from. But that was more just because it was like, what voice can you do? Well, I thought I could do this one. So
we did get a request for you to give us an act your age, Joanna.
Act your age, Joanna.
I never knew about that trick where you smash every single bottle and he says that. It seems like there's lots of little Easter eggs, and I really appreciate the extra mile.
Yeah, that's the only memory from Perfect Dark I have, is smashing those bottles. All right, well, we better get to Project Yooka-Laylee here. Enough reminiscing. Let's talk about the future.
Yeah, so I just to let you know, so we've got, in the next 10 minutes, there may be some other noise happening, because there's another interview going to happen with Gavin right next to me. So we may run out of time in 10 minutes. So I don't know if that's
probably have kind of a dueling banjos situation going on there in the room.
Well, you'll be hearing him answer other questions, and so that'll be really weird, won't it? He'll be answering different questions to the ones I'm answering. So. I'll try and talk a bit faster.
Okay, fair enough.
All right, well, Playtonic. All right, so from the logo to the whimsical nature of the website and your social media, your mission statement now seems to be recapturing the same magic of Rare's, classic N64 years. So how important was it for you guys to tap back into that philosophy? Yeah,
so definitely it was very important to be able to go back to that. But I think that's kind of where we'd been anyway. It's just maybe that outlet wasn't there before. So I think it's probably a reflection of us, setting up on our own, and then just thinking, all right, what are we going to do? All right, this, and it felt like it kind of came naturally. That's what we wanted to say, and that when we tweet and whatever we write on Facebook or social media, that's just it's kind of a reflection of who we are, really. So it kind of comes naturally, really. I think that's about as much as I can say to that.
We had a call from the aforementioned creative director for Lobo Destroyo, Jamie Guy. Shall we take that?
Yeah, sure.
Mr. Sutherland, I was wondering, what do you think about all the new tools that are available to small developers that are trying to make games, as well as the indie developer programs opening the doors for console development for aspiring teams like ours? Also, how do you think that this is different from back in your chief keyboard tapping days when you were working on the Banjo titles? And what do you think this is going to mean for games moving forward? Thank you.
Oh, so what's interesting is this is a kind of, and we touched on it earlier, is a kind of a full cycle. Back when I joined Rare, I mean, you had just seen a cycle of where people were creating games in their bedroom. So they were working on things like the Sinclair Spectrum, BBC Micro, and they were building these things on their own, and then they were getting published by companies, and they're releasing them on cassette tape. And nowadays, and then so that then vanished, and then you started to see that there were larger and larger publishers that had to come out, and you needed to be able to create a game. You needed a significantly sized dev team, and if we were trying to create something that we're trying to create now in, say, 10 years ago, it would have been difficult, because the first thing we'd have gone was, right, well, we'll need to create an engine. Right, that would be 2 years then, and then it would be 2 years before or a year something before we built anything else. So nowadays, of course, with something like Unreal or Unity, you can get that pretty much right away. And it's, with Unity 5 now being free, you can basically start today, and you can start with pretty much a year or 2 year into development of where you'd need to be to build your game. So you kind of got a 2 year advance on where you would have been if you tried to do it without that.
Does that free up your creativity more to focus on those more kind of creative elements in the games as opposed to building out the engines?
I think so, yeah, because we're definitely, I mean, one of our rules really is that we're not tech focused. That doesn't mean that we won't do things that look nice, but we're not going to focus on technology for the sake of it. So you won't hear us talking about some amazing tech system and trying to promote ourselves based on that. It will all be about the characters and the worlds and the gameplay. And something like Unity allows you to do that, because you can, for example, if you think, I need this feature, I need to be able to do whatever in a game, you can go onto the Unity Asset Store. If it's not already in Unity, then somebody will probably have written it already. And it kind of touches back on what I was saying earlier. If you're trying to solve a problem, often somebody's already solved it. And in the case of game development, somebody's probably already written the thing you need to try and create the feature you want. So a lot of it's kind of searching for what's out there and saying, well, actually, we can save ourselves time by taking something that somebody's already done and then building upon that.
Yeah, like just a plugin for Unity or whatever it might be. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, because it's not like we're not going to go out and buy a character duo. We're not going to go out and buy a bear and a bird or something from the asset store and put them in. But you might buy like an audio system or something, or some other system that helps you with development. So yeah, there's things that you can go out and do now that you just wouldn't be able to do. So, and in many ways, it means that there is this cycle I said that you're seeing now small teams, individuals and small teams producing games, and with digital distribution as well, you're seeing those come out, and they can be produced at a very low cost. And I think that's just good for the industry generally, because you're getting a whole variety that wasn't there. I think we kind of did go through a cycle of basically sequel after sequel after sequel, and that understandably because of the spiraling costs of creating those games, is that you play safe and you go, well, let's just do a sequel.
Yeah.
But nowadays, the cost of creating something small can be very little indeed, and so the risk involved is a lot less, and so therefore the creativity that you see and the kind of weird and wacky ideas that you see start to reflect the kind of games that were out back in the 1980s. And I think that's good,
yeah,
for everybody. really.
We got another question from a gentleman named Steve. He says, Chris, will you take a pay cut? I've got 5 mouths to feed. Actually, that was Steve Males who asked that question.
I'll tell him I'll negotiate with them on that one.
Okay, fair enough. We'll pass that along.
Well, we saw on Twitter through the Poop report, POOP. Poop told us how musician heavy you are, and then you just recently brought on Andy Robinson as a writer. So
that's right, yeah.
Yeah, is Playtonic still expanding, or have you about reached your critical mass for the time being?
I think for the next short period, we're probably not going to expand greatly, but there will be a point, I don't know, in a number of months when we will probably look to increase size. I think we've only recently really kind of started properly, so we need to kind of have a period where we kind of consolidate and just build what we need to build with the group of us that we've got. The reason we've added the people that we have added is just because we needed to fill certain gaps. So, for example, we needed really talented musicians, and we know we've been in contact with those guys before, so we know that they're, we want to get those guys involved as much as possible, all of them really, if we can. And then for Andy, we just weren't experienced in that area at all. We don't know when we're tweeting what we're tweeting. We don't know. We're not really media savvy as such, because we just spent however many years just tapping on keyboards and generating games.
And that was the kind of stuff that Lee would typically do, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So we need someone to cover that, even if it's just to respond to all the emails we get. Because one thing we hadn't appreciated until we announced was that there's a lot of love out there for the kind of things that we want to do. So we were spending a lot of time just answering emails. Now, we could have gone the route of saying, it's just a standard response and we won't bother replying, but it felt like that would be rude considering people have taken the time to respond to us. It feels like we should
Thank you
respond.
For your interest in Playtonic.
Right.
Exactly, yeah. Thanks very much. Please buy our game. End of. So we felt we had to reply, and that just took our time. But we'd known Andy for a while, so it made sense that he would come on and help us.
That's fantastic. Yeah. We look forward to interacting with him on a regular basis.
Excellent.
Pestering him endlessly, yeah. I think you mean. Yes.
That's potato.
We did get a forum question from the Master DS, the master of the Nintendo DS. He wants to know, are you planning on creating a new shared universe for Playtonic Games, starting with Project Yooka-Laylee, which we know nothing about? Will future Playtonic games be set in the same world, such as the way that Donkey Kong, Banjo, Conquer, Ghoulies, and so on seem to be?
So I like that question because it's almost like I'd written that for you and said, ask me this question. So that's absolutely the case.
Are you telling us that you are the Master DS?
No, I'm not actually, but it's a great question. Thank you, Master DS. No, I am not. If you check I'm sure he's not just been created, or he's not got any. He's not Scottish, I'm sure.
We'll need to look into that. We'll check his IP.
Check his IP. So absolutely, what we want to do is, because we have a history of creating fun and interesting characters, and what we want to do is create a universe, is exactly the word I'd use, of characters, and ones that won't just guest star in each other's games, but also star in their own games. So, any of the characters we create, we want to be able to be characters that can feature in their own games in their own right in future. Obviously, that's some time in the future, and we're not building more than one game at the time, but we've always got that in mind when we're creating these characters, that it's something that's like, well, this character could be over here, he could be doing that, and that when we create them, they will have in our heads, if not in the game, they will have a kind of background history to them as well. So we'll, there'll be something interesting about them in their makeup or their history.
I don't know if it was audible, but that was Hyle and I both drooling through your whole answer.
That sound was the whole fan community squealing in delight. Yeah,
I think that's exactly. You definitely know your audience.
Well, this is exactly the kind of things we love to do. So, like I said earlier, it kind of matches up. It's great that we're getting feedback from people, but so far it's just matched up pretty much one-to-one. It's like people are saying, oh, you must do this, don't do that. And it's like, well, yeah, that's exactly what we're thinking as well. So, yeah, no, it's all looking good.
Great. Well, we're just at about time, but I have one final question that we wanted to ask you that came in. Did Microsoft and or Rare ever find out about the dev kits you stole? That was actually from Gavin Price of Playtonic.
Oh, was it? Where did they get these questions from?
He told us that we had to ask that one just so you would shit yourself on the air.
He's right. So I'm just kind of wiping up now. None of them work. That's the thing.
They're probably decoys. I'm sure they set those out when you were leaving.
They're those things like you go to IKEA and there's like computers there, but they're not really computers.
It's just a piece of plastic. What is this?
Yeah, exactly.
It's labeled real dev kit. What could have gone wrong?
That's probably where he actually got them from. Yeah.
Well,
IKEA.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an
you.
enormous pleasure that we never even anticipated that you would deign to do this.
Oh, thank you very much. It's been great to talk to you, actually, and great to answer a whole lot of these questions. And it exercises my brain to be able to go back into the past and think about what did happen and what didn't happen.
Well, we're really looking forward to seeing what you and the team come up with.
Thanks.
And we're definitely going to be checking out the rest of the week's coverage that's soon to drop.
Oh, we forgot to ask about Stop and Swap.
Damn it!
Damn it!
I knew we forgot
All
something.
right, well.
Maybe next time.
The next interview will make this one look like joke. All right, thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much.
Well, our thanks again to Chris Sutherland. We did want to give, yet another thanks to everyone who submitted a question. Like we said,
yes, we are incredibly sorry we did not get to the majority of your questions. Like I said, we only had an hour, but we want to thank everybody who contributed and informed the discussion. First of all, from the DK Vine Forum, we want to thank XD375, Spuzzwick, the Master DS, ILDC, Baron Barrier, a.k.a. Thomas Freestad, Tamarin88, Rock, MDog1 a.k.a. Michael Peterson, Caramel Man, Milo, Scrap69,
hey, lads.
that's Tip Tup Junior 94, Crispy, Super Banjo, Yusef, a.k.a. Cat Stevens, Coin Collector, DKBK362.
They must take 3 days off the year from playing those games.
Yeah, exactly. James Guy from Off of Left-Handed Studios, makers of Lobo Destroyer versus La Liga de los Villanos.
We also had calls from Dave. Just Dave.
Oh, thanks for calling Dave.
Yeah, great, Dave. And all the Daves in the world yell out, "You're welcome." Matt Corna, Matt Jones, a.k.a. Captain Neckbeard, Cameron Regal, Malik, Alf from Off of the Forum, Kevin Bolger, a.k.a. Kevin Folgers, Mamechi, Blue Pudding from Off of the Forum, a.k.a. Josh from Off of the Geek Critique, and Casper Kuzeminski. So thank you, everyone. We're sorry if we didn't get to ask your question specifically. As we were doing the interview, it was a process of cleaning up the questions that we had coming up so that we could fit into the space of an hour. But hopefully, Chris Sutherland is welcome to come on the show again, perhaps when the game gets a little further into development. And
barring that, we can always reuse the questions for Miyamoto when we have him on.
This has been a File 2 production.
Que rico.